Church, welcome. It is a pleasure to be with you again. We're in week 2 of our sermon series over the Christmas story, and we're titling it The History of Christmas. We believe this story, the Christmas story, is like a hot cup of chocolate. It's one of those stories that just warms your soul, and after the year that we've had, there is nothing better than the story of God coming down in the form of a child and revealing himself to the world. So, church, we want to invite you in this moment to look at this story with new eyes, to hear it with new ears, and to ask the Spirit that dwells inside of you, God, how do I fit into the story of Jesus? How do I deliver him to my neighbors, to my family, and to my friends? But one of the most beautiful things about this story is how many different types of people that God chose to work through to deliver his son to a broken world. He used young parents. He used nameless shepherds that were out in the countryside that no one else found significant. He used the rich and the poor, and every single person had a hand in delivering Jesus to the world. So, church, every single one of us fits into this story because we do the same thing. We are called to deliver Jesus to a broken world. Historically, righteous anger has been one of the biggest catalysts for peace. Righteous anger has created hospitals, it created universities, it created orphanages. The church saw these injustices that raged around them, and they invited Jesus to reshape the way that the world was. In modern times, anger has changed many to challenge the evil that is before them, from combating sex trafficking to poverty, to racism. So to open things up this morning, I want to ask you a question. What makes you righteously angry? Where do you want to deliver Jesus to? What part of the world do you see all of this brokenness, all of this hopelessness, and you say this is a place where we need Jesus to come in and transform the way that the world is currently working? Church, what makes you righteously angry? So, church, what I hope that we find this morning is that God is actively trying to deliver the Prince of Peace to a world that needs it. And he's actively calling you to be the one that delivers peace to your family, to your friends, and to your neighbors. But as we will find in this story, that delivery hurts, that it's painful, that it causes problems, but it calls our rawest emotions and it brings us to our knees. Church, let's pray. Father, you brought us the Prince of Peace. True and perfect peace can only be found in your Son. Father, when righteous anger stirs in our souls, when injustice breaks our spirit, deliver to us Jesus. May your kingdom reign on earth, and all that is broken be put back together. And may we deliver peace in all areas of our life. Amen. 740 years before Christ, the prophet Isaiah was given this message by God. He said, warn the tribe of Judah. Tell them that there is dark days ahead, that there's going to be all kinds of suffering, that the Assyrians are coming, and it's going to be a period that is going to be incredibly difficult. And in Isaiah 8, beginning in verse 22, Isaiah said this, and they will look to the earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. But the good news in this passage is that Isaiah is not done with his prophecy. It doesn't end with just chaos, injustice, and pain. But in chapter 9, Isaiah introduces a new king, someone who is going to make things right. So picking up in Isaiah chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. But there will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelled in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you, as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. And then verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The details in verse 6 completely changed Hebrew history any which way that they thought about it or understood it before this moment. You see, before this moment, they were yearning for this moment when peace could come back to earth, where things could be made right like it was when Adam and Eve walked with God. They waited for the king to come back home, to take everything that was broken and to make it right. You see, the Hebrews, they understood that peace was going to come, but they didn't know how it was going to come or when it was going to come. Theoretically, the Messiah could have sent an angel, and that angel could have made all things right. Or the Messiah could have been God, but he transcends down as a king holding a sword to make things right. But Isaiah whispers to us in this moment how intimately the Father wants to approach those that he created in his image. How amazing of a mystery is it that of all the ways that God could have came down to earth to meet us in our chaos, in our pain, and in our brokenness, he chose to come through the innocence of a child. You see, there is nothing weaker, more helpless, or more dependent than a child. This past week, we have a 3-year-old that's living with us, and she's an absolute angel. She's just so sweet, and at times, she's such a joy to be around. But in this moment, none of that was true. She was exhausted. My other children were kind of picking at her and trying to see how frustrated they could get her, which is not a good thing. But there was this moment when little Leslie came up to me, and she was just whimpering, and it was a little mixture of both English and Spanish, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I said, "Baby, what's wrong? Tell me what's wrong." And she crawled up into my lap, and she tucked her head into my neck, and she was just quiet. She quit crying, she quit whimpering, she quit saying all of these words, and then eventually she just whispers into my ear, "Daddy, I love you." To think that our Messiah, our God, our Creator, chose to come to earth in such this intimate and beautiful manner speaks volumes for the God that loves and chases after us. You see, he could have came down as a king with a sword. He could have sent an angel. Rather, God chose to come intimately and innocently so that he could experience the pain that you've felt. Church, if you want to see Jesus, if you want to know what our God actually looked like, do not look towards earthly rulers. Look into the eyes of a child. Don't look towards opulence or prestige. Look to a manger. Church, I want to invite you right now in this moment to pause. What chaos and pain are you experiencing right now in your life? Where do you need the Prince of Peace? Let's take a moment and reflect on that passage that we just read, but specifically verse 6. Isaiah 9:6 says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." So 740 years, give or take a few years, after those words by Isaiah were penned, those words came to life. Let's revisit our passage that we read from last week. That's Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. "In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. So if we could review the life of Mary up to this point, somewhere in the window of 13 to 15 years old, Mary, this pious, poor, small-town girl who had her entire life full of hopes and dreams before her, is visited by the angel Gabriel. And she is told some alarming news. She is told that she would be carrying and bear this child that was prophesied in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, a verse that Mary at this point in her life would have been intimately aware of. She is told by the angel Gabriel that she is the one that is going to deliver this Christ child. Socially, this would have introduced pain and chaos into her world. What is Joseph going to say? What about my friends and my family? Socially, we found last week that Mary probably wasn't even welcome in her own town because of her circumstances that had come upon her. On top of this, Mary is forced to leave her small town for Bethlehem, 80 miles away. And she will transition at this point in her life from a teenager to a mother. And I once heard this quote regarding motherhood. And it's from Sanak Sakar. Giving birth is the second most painful thing that a woman can take. The first thing is being burned alive. After witnessing the birth of my own children, I feel like the quote that we just heard is pretty applicable. This is not an activity that I really personally want to engage in, but it's something that my wife has done exceptionally well. And I remember when she was pregnant with our second child, June, that she said, you know what, I'm going to try not to take pain medication for this one. I want the whole experience of becoming a mother. And we've heard this quote before, that when a child is born, it's not just the child, but it's also the mother. And she wanted this raw experience of it. And June, I don't know if she heard what her mother was saying from deep down inside the womb, but she said, you know what, Mom, I'm going to give you the full experience. And I remember that when her water broke, we were in one of the largest corn mazes we'd ever been in, and we were right in the middle of it. That was how June decided she was going to announce that she was ready to enter the world. When we finally got to the hospital, we were in one of those moments where even if Andrea wanted to switch and take pain medication, that it was probably too late. And I remember that my beautiful wife in this moment completely transitioned into a different person. That all of this pain that was like waves going over her body, that she had this resolve and this focus that was beautiful. But she really just kind of bared down and focused on the matter at hand. And through the most pain that she'd ever experienced, there was still this level of determination. And all of that pain produced one of the most beautiful things that I have ever seen in my life. And I remember that after she brought June into the world and she held her in her arms, that all of these screams and all of this pain that she has experienced suddenly stopped. And all the chaos of all the nurses that had been running in and out and the doctors who were coming and checking on her, everything went quiet. And for the first time that day, there was peace. For Mary, I can't imagine the emotions that she felt on that Christmas morning when she was in this new town and she was not surrounded by these women that she had hoped and prayed for would be there with her when she needed them. But unwelcome in her own community, at this moment, she probably was surrounded with women that lived next door, and carrying on her back the shame and ridicule of her outward circumstances and a deep unknown of what tomorrow would bring. You see, Mary suffered turmoil. She suffered chaos and fear. But Mary delivered peace. And in an instant, she had her vindication and her justification resting in her arms. I imagine Mary, who was noted for being so strong in her faith when she first encountered that angel Gabriel, that she knew that the road that was before her was going to be daunting, that it was going to be scary, that she would face ridicule, embarrassment, and abandonment. But faithfully, Mary delivered peace. So 2,000 years later, This story that is still so absolutely compelling that God chose his grand entrance through this poor small town pious girl. What have we learned from the story of Mary? I feel there's a few big things that we can take away from this. First, even those that are favored by God suffer. So church, if you are hurting right now, if it feels like there is just chaos swirling around in your life, know that you are in good company. The good news is that the Prince of Peace pulls close to those who are brokenhearted. Second, we learn from this young mother that peace isn't achieved by picking up stones or a sword. Peace comes from faithfulness, from saying, I know that this is what God is calling me to. And even though there's chaos and pain that's swirling around me, instead of picking up a stone or picking up a sword, I'm going to go to my knees in prayer, because the only one that can see me through this is the God who has called me to this. So church, if you are experiencing pain and chaos, the most natural instinct is to lash out, is to say, God, why are you not moving and working right now in this moment? Or lashing out at your neighbors and your friends. But Mary showed us that peace can only be found in faithfulness and in Jesus. So church, as chaos swirls around you, as your neighbors, your friends, and your family are hurting, may you deliver peace into the world by going to your knees in prayer and inviting God to come in and change everything.
Thank you for joining us. Our Compassion Challenge continues into week 2 of Advent, which is the week of peace. And we want to extend peace, which is ever so needed in our communities, in our lives, and in those around us who we love. They are in need of peace, and so are each one of us. And just a crazy, chaotic time. And so we hope this week of the Compassion Challenge, you will extend peace in a unique way to those around you. Colossians 3:15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace, and be thankful." This week, our Compassion Challenge is each day this week, intentionally pray for peace in our church, city, and country. We want you to pray for peace. We want you to pray for peace in your lives, in your church, in our city, and in our country. We want to pray together that God's peace would come, that He would bring peace in these places. So each day this week, we as one body want to take up this Compassion Challenge and pray for peace, because we know that this is a chaotic world, and only through God do we find peace, and does our world find peace itself.
Church, I thank you so much for engaging with us again today. And I want to invite you to this. Right now, if you are looking around in the world and there's so many things that you see that you don't like, if there's these things that make you righteously angry, I want to call you to do what Mary did and go to your knees and pray. Invite the Prince of Peace to come in and change things. Because no matter how much we view ourselves or how high of a pedestal we place ourselves, the only person that can actually bring change and bring peace in our world is the Prince of Peace. So church, we want to challenge you and invite you this week to go to your knees in prayer. Pray for your neighbors. Pray for your family members. Pray for those that you love and adore, and also for those that shatter and break your heart. And invite the Prince of Peace to come into their lives as well. Church, if you are going through anything, we want to make sure that you don't shoulder this alone. God created us to live in community. So we want to invite you in this moment now to share with us your prayer requests. Share for us the decisions that it feels like God's placing on your hearts. Maybe He's calling you to take a deeper walk with Him, and He's calling you to baptism. Maybe He's calling for you to give up some sin that is in your life that is causing this pain and this chaos. We want to invite you to connect with us so that we can walk with you through that time. Church, we also want to give you an opportunity to give as an act of worship. When we see the story of Christ, we see all of these people that brought all of these beautiful gifts and they laid them down at the feet of Jesus because they understood that he is king. So church, we want to give you that opportunity as well. Let's give our good gifts to our King Jesus. Have a great week. Be the hands and feet of Jesus.